In journalism, there's a cottage industry writing about the next big thing. Articles on the latest innovations fascinate us, and part of it may be we don't want to ever feel out of the loop, or maybe we'd like to invest in something that could prove to be indispensable within the next few years. For instance, there's a social media photo sharing app you might have heard of, and it is called Be Real. One of the common gripes about Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is that people share images and videos of themselves purportedly showing what their real life looks like, when we all know those images may actually be highly curated, airbrushed versions of their lives only during their very best moments. And you often see the person sharing that image from a location that appears to be staged. Here I am having a perfect brunch on my balcony overlooking the French Riviera. So many social media users might then suffer from envy and feel that their lives, by comparison, are not nearly as fabulous as their friends. But Be Real solves the dilemma of being subjected to that kind of one-upsmanship that can make you feel lousy about your own boring life. Once a day, at a random time, Be Real prompts you to take a picture of what you're doing at that very moment, no matter how mundane, and share that with everyone. So be real. Here I am folding the laundry. Aren't you jealous? Be Real was developed in 2020 and is now apparently the big thing, the app to have on your phone with a gazillion users worldwide. So just imagine if you've been an early investor in Be Real when it was still a struggling startup. You would have a place on the French Riviera. You can't help reading about whatever might be the next big thing, but it's usually more substantial than a social media app. Next big things include stuff like artificial intelligence, cars that drive themselves, reusable rockets, the editing of genes to eradicate disease and improve crops, quantum computing, and on and on and on. We are interested in the next big thing because we have long been conditioned to expect new technologies and innovations that promise to make our lives safer, healthier, faster, cheaper, smarter, more entertaining, or more convenient. Or that there will be a next big thing that will help the environment, or that will help us lose weight, or even make us more enlightened, or perhaps deepen our spirituality. And always there's the prospect of getting wealthy if you can anticipate or cash in on the next big thing. I think it's fun to know about next big things, but I also suspect that one reason so many people write about it and why there's such a big audience eager to read about it is because we seem to be wired to want something other than what we already have, or even to be something or someone other than who we already are. That's not inherently a bad thing because let's say we're in an abusive relationship, we need and we should be seeking a way out of that. If we're living in poverty, we need to find a way to have enough to make ends meet, to have safety and security and health for ourselves and the people who rely on us. Even if we're doing all right economically and in our relationships, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be and do better, to advance yourself, even reinvent yourself a little bit. It's good to dream and to plan and to achieve. But we also know the impulse to have what we don't have or to be someone we're not. That can be destructive. It can lead us into a way of being where we're feeling unfulfilled, unhappy, insufficient, and incomplete. And in our thinking, that can move us in at least two possible directions. Forward towards some magic next big thing that we think will be the answer to all of our problems, or it can move us backward, where we find ourselves saying some version of, if only things were the way they used to be, then all would be right with the world. Sometimes we can even do both things at once. Right alongside our desire for the next big thing, we'd also pine for the good old days when life felt a whole lot less complicated, before you got battered and bruised. The writer Barbara Brown Taylor, one of my favorite authors, calls that a desire to go back to a mythological paradise, a Garden of Eden, where there was nothing to hide and nothing to hide from, a place where nothing had ever been broken, where there were no chips or dents or scars, a place where everything was still whole and holy and pleasing to God. Now, plenty of us have that kind of feeling of not having that more innocent way of being anymore and wanting our next big thing to actually be a return to the past. Sometimes I find myself yearning for a simpler time before life took me in directions I never asked for or counted on. So, not having what you feel you need in the present can move us forward towards something we've never had that'll maybe fix everything, or so we think. And then there's the type of not having where we once had it, but we don't have it anymore. And I'm pretty sure that second type is a lot harder to live with because the thing we once had can grow into a mythology that probably never quite was as perfect as we convince ourselves it was. These days, we see that a lot when we have a public discussion about American history. On the one side are people who think it's healthy to acknowledge that not everything about our history is very pretty. On the other side are those who think it's unpatriotic to ever bring up racism or slavery or the killing and forced removal of native people from their land. That's because our natural tendency is to create mythologies that are rosy. If we're unhappy with the way things are now, we can always point back to what we believe was a much happier time. And it's mighty uncomfortable to have that notion of how great things used to be messed with. But once, a very long time ago, through the prophet Isaiah, God spoke to a group of people and did just that. Isaiah challenged the myth that they had created about their past, and he challenged their dream of ever trying to reclaim that myth as their next big thing. Now, those ancient Israelites had lost a way of life that they really treasured, a time when, at least in their memory, if not in reality, life had always been awesome and trouble-free. Now, to be fair to them, these were descendants of people who'd been plucked from their homes by an invading army and marched off to live in captivity in a foreign land. A lot of people had suffered and died along the way. To make matters worse, in their absence, the foreigners, the Babylonians, had occupied their homes. The Babylonians had grazed their sheep. The Babylonians had reaped the harvest of their crops. The Babylonians had desecrated and destroyed their holy temple. The really interesting thing is, by the time Isaiah spoke to these people on God's behalf, that whole calamity was 50 years behind them. The people who'd been carted off into captivity were their long dead parents and grandparents. By this time, the Israelites were right back home. They had rebuilt the temple. But things just weren't the way they wanted them to be. Now, sure, they had a temple, but in their imagination, it paled in comparison to the one that Solomon had built and the Babylonians had destroyed. Sure, they were living back in their hometown, but things were different now. The city walls just were not as tall as they imagined that they used to be. Sure, they were living in their own country, but their society had changed. The world had become more multicultural. People of different races and religions were now living among them. Israel was not such a powerful nation anymore, and they resented that loss of status. So life was more complex. And they were living off the fumes of a mythology that told them the world should be more black and white. So they were disgruntled, outraged, and resentful. They felt left behind. In effect, they were stuck. Emotionally, spiritually, stuck in neutral because their minds were in reverse. They wanted the next big thing, for God to swoop down and make their lives better, but only as long as life looked like it once was. More accurately, how they imagined it had been. But God, speaking through Isaiah, was having none of that. In the first place, what they were pining for never really existed the way they imagined it had. More importantly, God's not in the business of staying in neutral, and certainly not a fan of anyone thinking in reverse. God always has and always will be in the business of moving forward, of creating and recreating. A new day of creation happens every single day, after all. In the Bible, the next big thing is never a return to the good old days. The next big thing is always something entirely new. And the best thing of all, maybe the greatest open secret of all, the message that God is constantly attempting to get through our thick skulls, and the reality that we are invited to wake up to every single day is simply this. The next big thing is not a thing at all, but us, you and me. We're just not created to be stuck in neutral or to think in reverse. It's not good for us. We're designed to move forward. We're called to have hope, to have faith, to believe in what's possible, to love. Because love is hope personified. I recently reread a great book that's both funny and hugely informative. It's called A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson. He wrote it way back in 2004. And it takes you on a dizzying journey through time and the creation and evolution of the natural world. Great book. It's full of wonderful nuggets like geologists are never at a loss for paperweights. But my favorite quote from the book is a bit more profound, and if I could, I would have this engraved on every one of our hearts. Bill Bryson writes, "We are awfully lucky to be here, and by we, I mean every living thing. To attain any kind of life in this universe of ours appears to be quite an achievement." He says, as humans, we are doubly lucky, of course. We enjoy not only the privilege of existence, but also the singular ability to appreciate it, and even in a multitude of ways to make it better. It is a talent we have only barely begun to grasp. God's message through Isaiah all those centuries ago, and to you and me today, is a promise that is right here in this very moment, a world and a life where we can appreciate the miracle of being alive in the present and marvel at the privilege of our existence in a world that's being created brand new with the dawning of every day, and to do our part every day to help make it better. A world and a life of wholeness and meaning and purpose and hope that is not behind us, but right in front of us. Because we are beloved, and in that love, anything and everything is possible. We are the next big thing, and it's up to us to live like it. It's up to you and me and our families and friendships to ask, what can I do to make this relationship healthier, happier, more loving? It's up to ask in our church, how can we be more creative and be of more service to our neighbors in our community and take the best care of each other and best share all the wonderful gifts each of us brings? It's up to each of us to ask, how can I best be the person God created me to be, the loving God who gave me this moment, not the past, but this moment on this planet to live fully? How can I be of the most help, the most use? How can I take my talents, my knowledge, my energy, my passion to make life better, not for my sake, but for the sake of all people and all creation? How can I be the gift the world needs me to be? How can I be, and how can all of us together be the next big thing? Well, God knows how. By trusting that in God's love for us and for everyone and for all creation, we already are that gift.